Hi there, I'm WTOP's Capitol Hill correspondent Mitchell Miller, and we're happy to have Maryland Congressman Jamie Raskin join us, who of course was the lead impeachment manager during the impeachment trial of former President Trump. And we're taking a look back at this past incredible year that's really included so many tumultuous events. And Congressman, if I could, just starting out about a year ago, you were one of those who was raising alarms in connection with many complaints that not enough was being done from the White House and the Trump administration related to this crisis as it was starting to evolve. I wonder if you could talk to me a little bit about your frustration and what the feeling was in those early days in Congress as you experienced that.
Thank you, Mitchell, for inviting me to be part of it. Well, look, my impression back then was one of absolute chaos, that there was no plan that had been put into place by the administration to deal with the crisis. And you may recall at the very beginning, what we were dealing with was the problem of thousands of Americans strewn all over the world and totally left to their own devices because the government, the State Department had not made provisions to get people back into the country. And so I had lots of constituents who were, stuck in Nigeria or Ethiopia or Canada or France or Germany or Japan or what have you. So we spent the first several weeks of the crisis just trying to get our people back home. And then I recall we were dealing with the problem of massive shortages in masks and personal protective equipment for nurses and doctors, and just a scarcity of information about what was going on. My office was involved in trying to meet all of these needs and to try to get information out. And we were also trying to get resources to the NIH, of course, for research purposes. So, my general impression is that the administration always kicked the can down the road and tried to delegate things to the states, which basically meant blaming governors and state governments for the lack of a nationally coordinated plan. And there was a lot of rampant money making and profiteering taking place at the federal level. And I thought it was chaos. With my colleague, Donna Shalala, who of course had been the secretary of HHS under President Clinton, we put together legislation called the Put America Back to Work Plan. And the idea was that the federal government would coordinate the states in getting the testing out, getting the contact tracing out, and all of the states would come up with their plans on how to get back to work, get back to school safely. But nothing like that happened. And instead, the federal government issued some general flabby guidelines. And as you know, it was just chaos out in the states. And we never really had a coherent nationwide plan for beating the disease, which is why we ended up #1 in COVID-19 case count, #1 in COVID-19 death count, all over the world, and unfortunately also #1 in COVID-19 propaganda. And everybody remembers then President Trump saying things like all of this will just be gone like magic at Easter time, or just picking random dates and saying all of this will be over, and then recommending that people inject themselves with bleach and so on. I mean, it was the opposite of what we need to do with organized science. But the good news is that today we have a real nationwide plan to crush the virus. We have seen a real triumph of science and private actors in science in the development of the vaccines. And we are on our way now with the passage today of the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. We're on our way to really beating the disease and moving.
Were you surprised during, say, after a few months during the middle of last year, that a lot of people thought, well, eventually the U.S. will get its tracking and get back on track with this, but many felt that it really never did. You had states pitted against each other to get medical supplies. You must have been troubled by the fact that this was continuing deep into the year.
Yes. Well, I mean, you've got it right. I mean, the whole reason that we have a federal government is to try to coordinate national action with the states, but instead the federal government was pitting the states against each other in this kind of race to the bottom, dog eat dog competition over scarce supplies, instead of us mobilizing private industry to produce the supplies we needed in terms of masks and gowns and PPE and ultimately the vaccine. I was very troubled by that, and very troubled that here we are in the world's richest country at our richest moment in our history with the greatest scientists in the world, and we had no plan to mobilize the country to defeat the disease.
Now, as you well know, everybody has had incredible personal stories, and if you don't mind, I'd like to talk a little bit about your personal story. This past year has been so difficult for so many people, but I can't imagine an individual who has gone through more than you have individually. And I know it's difficult, but I wonder if you could, well, first of all, I'd like to, as everyone has, extend my condolences for your son, Tommy. Everybody on behalf of WTOP would like to do that. But related to the latter part of the year, when you lost your son, and then just within a week, which is just unbelievable to consider, we had the January 6th insurrection with your daughter and son-in-law there. Can you take us back to what that week was like for you, and how you and your family, which I know you have a very strong family, how you were able to cope to get through that period?
Well, first of all, thank you for your condolences, Mitchell, and to all of my friends at WTOP who've been so kind. It was and has been and remains a devastating thing for our family to lose our precious Tommy, our middle child, who was 25. He was about to turn 26 years old in January. He was a law student at Harvard, and he was just a beautiful, sparkling soul in a world full of brokenness. And he had great love in his heart, and he had great compassion, and he was always the life of the party, and everybody wanted to be around him. He was so funny, and he was so filled with mirth and joy. He was a passionate vegan because he felt intensely the suffering of all human beings and all living beings. And he wrote lots of poetry, and he did it as slam poetry, and he would get up and he would perform it. And he had multiple poems answering the question, why are you a vegan? And he would talk about different dimensions of his commitment to, feeling the suffering of animals and the need of animals to live their own lives, And so he had some extraordinary poetry. We're in the process of collecting a whole bunch of his essays because he was also a compulsive essay writer. He always loved to write essays about things he was thinking about, and also a poet. And so we're our daughters are going to edit a collection of his work on that. We lost him on the last day of 2020, that terrible, wretched year when we lost hundreds of thousands of people who died of this silent killer disease. Many of them alone at home or in the hospital in their beds, not even with their loved ones. We lost Tommy on that last day of the year, and we laid him to rest on on January the 5th, our family had just a family ceremony. And on the next day, our daughters were home along with a lot of other family, cousins, nieces, nephews, uncles and aunts and stuff. And but our youngest daughter, Tabitha, said to me, "Daddy, don't go to work," because it was my first day going back. And I said, "I've got to. Constitutionally, we have to. We're going to count the electoral college votes." And I said, "Why don't you just come with me?" And so she decided to come, and my son-in-law, Hank, who's married to our other daughter, Hannah, he decided to come as well to see the peaceful transfer of power. And I was one of the people that Speaker Pelosi had asked to answer what we knew were going to be objections, just spoken nonviolent objections to the acceptance of electoral college votes from Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, some other states. And so we were there. Steny Hoyer had allowed me to use his office so I could have family members there. And lots of people were coming to give us a hug. Both Democrats and Republicans were coming to say how sorry they were about the loss of Tommy. And then when the proceeding began at 1 o'clock to receive electoral college votes, I went in. Tabitha and Hank were up in the gallery, and I spoke. I invoked Abraham Lincoln, actually, from his famous Lyceum speech, where he said that if destruction and dissolution ever come to America, it will not be from abroad. It will be because of threats from within. It will be our own internal conflict and turmoil that would dissolve the Union. And those were some prescient words that Honest Abe spoke. We, began to debate Arizona, and we began to debate, the integrity of the election. After I spoke, Tabitha and Hank went back to Steny Hoyer's office. And shortly thereafter is when we began to receive reports that there had been a breach in security in the Capitol, and the Capitol was being overrun. And then within a matter of minutes, we heard the sound of a battering ram at our door, like people were taking like huge logs or something and banging them against the door to get in. Capitol officers entered with their guns drawn. Our new chaplain conducted a prayer. People were calling their wives and husbands to say goodbye. Members were removing their congressional pins so they wouldn't be identified. And of course, I was scrambling to figure out what was happening with Tabitha. And Hank, my chief of staff, Julie Kagan, was in the office with them, and I told her to guard them with her life, and she did. She found a fire pick in the fireplace, and she held it up over the door. They had locked the door. They had barricaded themselves in with all the furniture, and the kids were hiding under the desk, and they were calling people and saying their goodbyes because they thought that everybody was going to die. And we were all evacuated from the floor. I wasn't able to get them at that point, which of course panicked me, but I kept calling our contacts in the Capitol Police and the Speaker's office. And about an hour later, they were able to get Tabitha and Hank out. And then, I reported our conversation as part of the impeachment trial, but we were very relieved, very tearful to be reunited. And that night, I had to stay. You remember, we were here till like 3:30 or 4 in the morning because we were adamant about going back in, but I sent them home earlier, and I said to Tabitha that I promised that the next time she came back to the Capitol, it would not be like this again. And she said, "Dad, I don't want to come back to the Capitol."
As a constitutional scholar and somebody who has taught and knows the Constitution as well as anyone. Moving forward, what was it like for you to pour everything into the impeachment proceedings? Was that in some ways helpful to you in terms of dealing with everything that you had dealt with over the past week plus? Or did you at one point feel like it was sort of overwhelming, as it might have felt for many of us?
Well, no, I think it was very helpful to me. I mean, I had a sense of great purpose and commitment to see it through. I think Sarah and the girls and our whole family were behind me in doing that. And, you know, the way I felt was that we had lost what was most precious to us in 2020, our son Tommy, and we were not going to lose our Constitution and our country in 2021. And I was going to stand and fight and throw everything that I had into it. We wanted to make clear to the country what high crimes and misdemeanors were, and why this was clearly an impeachable event, and why this was the worst crime ever committed by a president of the United States against the Republic. I mean, nothing even comes close to the incitement of a violent mob to attack Congress and the counting of electoral college votes in order to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. So that was the story that we told. I had a remarkable team of impeachment managers. We had great staff. We were, in some sense, saved by the fact that the president asked for more time, for a couple more weeks to get ready, and that allowed us to have a couple more weeks to get ready. And that was time that I really did need, I think, emotionally and psychologically to focus. I was so just inundated in grief and agony for the first several weeks. It's very blurry to me, that period. But more and more I came out of it, and I began to focus on what needed to be done. And the feeling I have emotionally is just missing Tommy terribly, terribly all the time, but at least not being in a state of kind of mental agony.
Right, because you had such a focused purpose at that time and went through everything, which is just really kind of hard to believe that that was actually the second impeachment proceeding in a year. And now here we are in the early part of 2021. There's still fencing around the Capitol, as you know, razor wire. What are your thoughts about whether or not this 9/11 type commission is actually going to come together, and how strongly do you feel that it should come together to investigate?
Well, I feel very strongly that we do it. We need to have a bipartisan or really multi-partisan or nonpartisan nationwide commission to examine the events of January 6th and the causes of it. You know, we've seen domestic violent extremism become the #1 terror threat in the country. That's according to the Department of Homeland Security under President Trump. They even admitted to that at the very end, that this was the worst terror threat that we faced. That threat has not gone away. And the problem with the ambiguous verdict in the Senate trial is that there are people who are in public office who continue to send very mixed signals about January 6th and violent insurrection and domestic violent extremism. 57 to 43 is a pretty resounding defeat for the president, and it was the strongest bipartisan conviction vote in U.S. history. There have only been 4 impeachments, Andrew Johnson, Bill Clinton, the first Trump impeachment, and this one. This was by far the most bipartisan, with 10 Republicans joining with all the Democrats on the House side and 7 Republicans joining us on the Senate side, and those Republicans being from all over the country: New England, Mid-Atlantic, the South, the Midwest, the West, Alaska, all over. But Trump beat the constitutional spread, the 2/3 requirement for an actual conviction. So it's in sort of this ambiguous place where it was a majority, but not the 2/3 supermajority. And we still don't have that categorical, decisive break from the Proud Boys and the 3%ers and the Oath Keepers, because Donald Trump continues to pursue a no enemies to his right policy, and so many Republicans continue to give him aid and comfort in that posture. So that's a real problem for the country, and I do think it's a problem also for the GOP. That is not how the Republican Party started under Abraham Lincoln. I mean, he began by denouncing the know-nothings and racism and nativism, and he began by denouncing mob violence against the Black population and against abolitionists and so on. And now here we are 150 years later, and the Republican Party suddenly is playing footsie with these violent, racist, extremist elements of our politics.
And lastly, I just wanted to ask you, and you touched on this, about your thoughts, the president's COVID relief plan, obviously a big legislative victory this week with this vote by the House. And for people who have, like yourself, gone through some extremely difficult times over the past year, I know that generally you are an optimistic person. What are your thoughts now as we move forward into 2021?
I feel great about where we're going, Mitchell. I mean, that $1.9 trillion package is going to be a literal and a metaphorical shot in the arm for America. We're going to get everybody vaccinated. We're going to invest in science. We're going to put the kids back in school by the fall. We're going to get food in people's refrigerators and cupboards. There's a lot of hungry people out there. We're going to put people back in jobs. So I'm excited about that. I wish it had been totally bipartisan, but it in fact is bipartisan in the sense that the vast majority of the public supports it. But we do have, that partisanship problem in Congress in Washington, and but I feel great about the fact that we're going to pass the universal violent criminal background check for gun sales. Again, something supported by the vast majority of the American people. More than 90% of Americans support that. And we're about to vote on that in a few minutes. So I'm excited about our movement there. So look, Joe Biden is kind of an old-fashioned politician. He obviously spent most of his career in the Senate. He's somebody who tries to push for consensus as much as possible. And I think that the nation gets that, even if the people running the Republican Party in DC don't get it. But that's more and more isolated, and that's unfortunate. That's a sad kind of demise for the Republican Party. And we need at least a strong, second party, if not a third party and fourth party. But I'm proud of where my party is right now, and I'm proud of what the Democrats are doing for America.
All right, well, we'll leave it there and hope that 2021 is a lot better than 2020. I want to thank you, Maryland Congressman Jamie Raskin, for joining us on WTOP. We really appreciate it.
And I appreciate your doing this, Mitchell. I really do. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Congressman. Thanks for taking the time. Really appreciate it.